Estamos en Madrid a pocas horas del primer entrenamiento Ágora Mediación. Estamos con el profesor, con el doctor Folger, fundador y presidente del Institute for Study of Conflict Transformation. Actualmente trabaja como profesor en comunicación en la Temple University. Buenos días, Joseph. Muchas gracias por estar aquí en España de nuevo con nosotros. Y bienvenido.
Es un placer estar aquí en España otra vez.
Bien, muchas gracias. Joseph, tell us please a little about yourself and your career, and how did you come transformation to mediation?
Yeah. Well, I was studying communication, and while I was a graduate student, I volunteered at a mediation program in the university town where I was working. And so I just got very interested in the practice of conflict intervention. And so after I finished my degree, I put my emphasis in research on mediation and the practice of mediation. And so I've always studied it and always been a practitioner at heart.
Okay, as a professor in communication and as an expert of this subject, what is your point of view of the conflict and the importance of the conflict for you?
I think what's important to think about in conflict is that it's communication between people. It's difficult communication because of differences, because of different points of view, different backgrounds, but it always ends up being a process of communication between people. And so when we mediate or when we work with conflict, we should remember that we're trying to help support positive changes in the communication between people who are in conflict.
And I would like to refer to the role of the power and the law and the interest when the parties get to mediation. What do you think about it? What do you manage when with these three elements?
So the three elements are the
Yes,
power,
powers, law, and the interest. Perhaps we can talk law, similar rights. No?
Yeah.
When parties arrive to the communication, to the mediation.
Well, when I'm working in mediation or with the transformative model of mediation, we tend not to think about it in terms of rights or in terms of the law, because the parties are there to talk about their issues, and certainly mediation is done in the context of the law, sometimes, not always. And it's important for the parties to have information before they start mediating about what the law might expect. So I don't bring that up as a mediator. I might give that to them in writing before mediation starts so that they understand if it's a divorce, what are the parameters, what are the expectations for what they have to reach agreements about. But I don't want to put myself in the role of somebody who is seen as a lawyer giving them advice or telling them about the law, because then I lose my ability to be neutral or to be able to facilitate their communication. In terms of power, I think there's always differences in power between people. No matter when we sit down and work with people in conflict. It's up to them to decide whether or not they want to challenge power or whether they want to accept power differences, because we all live in situations where there's power differences, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's up to them to decide whether they want to challenge the power that someone else has. But as a mediator, I would never encourage them to necessarily do that, because there are always consequences for them if they do challenge power.
Yeah. Okay. How was the transformative model born, really?
Yeah, it really came. I met a colleague of mine who's a law professor, and we were both involved in mediation for about 10, 15 years, and we had very similar views in the United States about what was happening to the evolution of mediation practice. And we were very concerned that mediation was losing its unique value. Mediation was becoming more and more like the processes it was supposed to replace. It was becoming more directive. It was mediators were being more like arbitrators or people who are giving advice, and they were losing the focus on the communication between the parties. So we ended up writing a book, offering a critique of mediation as it was evolving in the United States, and saying we're worried about this. We're worried that mediation isn't going to be valuable to people because they won't see it as different. And then we developed the transformative model, which is trying to put an emphasis on what makes mediation a unique and valuable process.
We all think that the emotion play a very important role in the conflicts, and we could even dare to say that they are the base thereof. Do you agree with this statement? And what is the role of communication in this sense?
So what is the role of communication in the discussion with the parties?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. In the with the emotion, you know.
the emotions?
The emotions.
Yeah. It's a very good question, because I think that for a long time, mediators felt they had to remove emotion from the conflict in order to work with the conflict. And in the transformative model of mediation, we assume that emotion is always a part of the conflict interaction, that inherently conflict is an emotional experience for people. Because usually if they go to mediation, they have not been able to settle the conflict on their own. And so they're very upset, they're angry, they're frustrated, there could be any number of emotions. I think mediators have to be comfortable working with emotional conflict interaction, and they need the skills to be able to do that.
Yes.
Many models of mediation do not work with the emotions, they try to get rid of the emotions, and I think that's unrealistic.
The transformative model is based on two statements, revolution and empowerment of people. From your professional experience, when you mediate, how do you implement this, and what pattern do you follow?
Yeah, I think what we do as mediators is to try to support the parties getting their voice, which is a form of empowerment for them. They can then speak more clearly about what's important to them, what they care about, what they want the other person to understand. And with reconocimiento, it's important that they begin to think about the other person, what's important to them, the meanings that they're trying to convey. And so the skills that we use in transformative mediation are supporting those two processes. We're not forcing it to happen, but as it happens, we highlight it, we hold it up, we let parties hear what they're saying so that they can see the changes that are occurring for them, and they become clearer about themselves and the other person.
Okay. In your opinion, is it more difficult for experienced mediator or novel mediator to learn transformative model?
It's very clear to me after 15 years of training that it's much harder for people to learn the transformative mediation model if they've been trained in a different model of mediation already and they've been using it. New mediators have very little difficulty other than just learning the skills. But if you've been trained in another model, you have to let a lot go. You have to walk away from what you've been doing in order to do this. And in many models of mediation, the training includes a lot of ways in which the mediator controls what the parties are doing. And in the transformative model, we are not trying to control the parties. The parties get to shape each other's behavior, and we support their efforts at doing that. But that's very difficult for mediators who are used to setting the ground rules, telling people when to talk, separating the parties so that they don't interact. If you are trained in that way of doing mediation, this becomes difficult. Mediators tienes miedo.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very difficult as well, perhaps, to control when the conflict is rising. No?
Exactly.
Okay. I'm convinced of revaluation and empowerment are part of the success in mediation. So do you understand that there are mediators that include them, although they defend other models where they feel more comfortable? Or could you they use as tool in a framework of other models?
Well, first of all, a couple things. First of all, I think in other types of mediation, empowerment and recognition can occur. The parties, may do that on their own. Maybe mediators support some of it. But when you look at what mediators are doing with the skills and the tools that other methods provide, many times they're getting in the way of the empowerment and the recognition, and they don't even realize how they're stopping those processes. So that the mediators themselves have to see how the skills that they're relying upon are either supporting the empowerment and recognition or are actually preventing it. So mediators who separate the parties, for example, many times are not allowing the parties to do the work of understanding each other because the parties are talking to the mediators, not to each other.
Okay. Is the agreement important for you and for the transformative model?
I'm glad you asked this because there's some misunderstandings about this
Yeah.
in the transformative model. First of all, if parties are focused on reaching an agreement, the mediator does not try to change that. So the empowerment means that the parties get to talk about what they want to talk about. Transformative mediators are not there to make sure that people fix the relationship if all the parties want to do is to decide on amount of money in a contract.
Mm-hmm.
So we would support that empowerment of the parties if they want to focus just on an agreement. What's different about the transformative model is we do not make the parties only focus towards an agreement. We let the parties talk about what's important to them, and they decide how important the agreement is for them. I can tell you, though, that in one large mediation program that we've done with the transformative model in the U.S. Postal Service, we did 10,000 mediations with transformative mediation, and 65 or 68% of those mediations ended up finishing, reaching an agreement, or not going on further. So in the transformative model, we would expect that parties would reach agreements about 65% of the time. Mm-hmm. Many times they don't reach an agreement because the issue they came in with is not what's really important to them. They end up talking about other things.
Uh-huh. How do you think that people who go to mediation to find a solution of their problems in that framework, but finally there is not agreement, may feel? No? How do you act in these cases?
Yeah. Well, what we end up doing is, even at the end of a mediation where there is no agreement about a contract or something, we summarize what the parties understand better for themselves and for each other, what their choices are in terms of what they want to do from that point. They can leave with a lot more clarity about why they could not reach an agreement. Wow. And that's valuable to them because now they know they have to go to court. So if we've worked with the differences and let them really explore those differences, and we haven't tried to push them to an agreement, they begin to understand why they couldn't do it, and they feel better about needing to decide that they're going to take the conflict to a different setting for the conflict to be resolved.
Mm-hmm. Do you follow up this mediation?
Sometimes, but mostly what we do is at the end of a mediation, if there is no agreement, we say to them, of course, if you want, you can come back. Maybe you have some time to think about what was discussed today. You'll have some ideas about what might work. You can always come back and continue this conversation with me as the mediator.
Joseph, what is your opinion about how mediation is progressing nowadays?
Well, I have concerns. In the United States, I think that there has been too much mediation, which is very evaluative and directive. And when you do that, people do not see a difference between mediation and other forms of conflict intervention. It confuses the public. So in the United States, we still have a process called evaluative mediation. To me, that is illogical because we already have a process such as arbitration, which offers evaluations of cases. So the public gets confused about what mediation is when we allow for, or if the mediation field supports, something that's called evaluative mediation. So I think mediators end up undermining the value of mediation, and then the public becomes disinterested.
Yes, nowadays you are working in a communication with an enterprise, with teams, and a dialogue in different part of the enterprise. And what do you think about the online mediation?
Well, I think online mediation might work depending upon how good the technology is. Yeah. So if I did a mediation recently with a woman in New York and a partner of hers that she worked with in London, and we had it on a teleconference. They were used to working that way a lot. They had to work that way because one was in New York, one was in London. They only met once in person, and it worked quite well. My only concern about that mediation was that I was in New York, sitting with the woman in New York. I should have been on a different place in a teleconference, I think somewhere else. Yeah. Because it could have been perceived that I was closer to her than the woman in London, but it worked very well.
Yes, and you think the model, the transformative model, is a good tool for it?
As long as you're focused on supporting positive changes in their ability to interact with each other.
Well, to finish, just to say that in Spanish, Spain, we are conducting important campaign for spreading mediation. What would you say to someone who knows nothing about it?
About mediation?
Yes, about mediation, yes, obviously.
I would say, number one, it's not easy for parties to come to mediation. It requires you to be willing to have a difficult conversation with someone. But if you come to a transformative mediation, you're going to feel supported in getting your voice and being able to say what you want to say. The mediator is not going to tell you what to talk about, is not going to limit what you want to discuss. They will work with and support how you want to have the conversation. Mm-hmm. And you have the ability to talk about even the ground rules for the way the mediation is going to unfold. Mm-hmm. And I think that encourages people to say, well, maybe I can do that because I'm not going to be pressured. One point I would add is many times people say, is it okay to have lawyers present in a transformative mediation? And I say absolutely, because lawyers many times help the parties to become clear about what's important for them. But sometimes there's conflict between a client and a lawyer, and the transformative mediator facilitates that conversation as well.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for your time, for your contribution with your training with first conference organized by Agora Mediation, and we hope to have the privilege of counting on your presence in Spain very soon.
Es un placer. Muchísimas gracias.